Hey guys, what is up? Is me, Little... Oh, new camera angle. Well, that's certainly something new. Well, of course, it's a new camera angle, so it has to be new. I don't know. Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and I know, it's a new type of video again, algorithm come at me, but hopefully this one will be interesting before, because I've done something like this before in the past, but I haven't done it for about over a year, I think. I'd like to say June last year was actually the last time I did one of these. It is a tier list, and of course I did it last time. I did it with my good friend Presto Time, and but this time I'm doing it on my own, and I kind of wanted to throw myself into these more, as I felt just they're more interesting, they'd bring out my more analytical side, and just in general, I'd have some more fun with them. A nice little change from the reactions, and like I said, I'm sorry I have been changing up the content quite a bit for you guys, so there's not really any kind of consistency for you to latch onto, but I have fun, like, changing it up a bit, and, you know, it's always, you know, variety is the spice of life, so definitely, changing it up will, hopefully, bring the fun into this channel. Like, not that it wasn't there before, but hopefully just add that little bit more extra. You know, you gotta have fun when you're making content for people. You gotta have fun. And, the tier list in question is an idea I came up with, but was heavily inspired by Wicked Binge. If you don't know them, they are basically the people that done like famous characters, evil to morally good. That's probably the worst way of describing it, but you know what I mean. They basically ranking them on morality. There, I should have put it like that. Stupid brain. But, effectively, we're doing something like this, but Thomas-fied. So it is Thomas characters, evil, good to, evil, blah, blah, blah. There we go, effectively, yeah. Before I get into this, I should emphasize, I am not a therapist, psychoanalyst, psychic, psychotic. Actually, that one might be slightly true, but I digress. We're going to get into this, and hopefully this will be a fun little change from the content I normally do, so drop the video a like if you enjoy, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and I will definitely get around to doing content like this, especially since summer is in full swing and I have a break. Don't know why I did that, but let's get into this. Obviously, we've got our tiers here. Good, slightly less good, morally grey, and slightly less evil, and evil. So, we're going to go through a few of these. So, obviously, I've got for the start, I've got the main 11. And afterwards, I've got some very minor, a few side characters, very few. If you want a part 2 to this, I can do more characters, and you put in the comments what characters you want to see me do. And so, but yeah, I'm surprised the tier list, like, fanatic. I'm surprised the tier list phase dropped out as much as it did, because it's such an interesting concept. Like, everyone's ranking stuff nowadays, and a tier list is just a very good way of not kind of defiantly putting everything in one thing. You can still you can put everyone within the kind of same circumference, putting it within the same area. Circumference is a circle, Jack. But, you know, just putting it in the same area just feels more constructive to me, and it feels more interesting. It makes the actual... you're not defiantly defining these characters. You kind of have... You're slightly on the fence, but you're still kind of coming down on an opinion on these characters, if that makes sense. And so, so obviously I've got, like, the main few engines. So, definitely an interesting format to go with. And first, we are going to start with Tommy the Tank Boy himself. Yes. Now, of course, Thomas is your stereotypical, like, main protagonist. He's very much seen as the role model, especially as far as, like, later seasons confirmed. Like, I'd say Season 7 onwards, and even some elements of earlier seasons, most notably Season 3, where he definitely has that role model persona. He mellows out quite a lot throughout the series, and there's definitely that kind of... He has one of the stronger moral compasses, definitely. I mean, he kind of has to, since, again, for that role model statement. But again, and one thing that's going to detract points from him, and what is what makes him such a convincing role model, is his personality. He's very, very cheeky, slightly narcissistic, I'd say, in some areas. Like he plays cruel pranks, especially Gone Gordon, and some other engines as well. He's got quite a kind of playful, cheeky persona, and sometimes that leads to him being quite inconsiderate towards others. And to be honest, a lot of the paybacks that Thomas receives, or the comeuppances he receives, he very much has coming to him, and I don't think anyone can deny that. And also, like, this is going to present a problem, I think, with this list in particular. Like, one problem I'm going to notice is what era do you consider canon, and what kind of era are we basing it on? So maybe in the future I will do it based on railway series personas or like TV series personas and kind of separate that. Also, bear in mind, this isn't just Thomas and Friends I'm going to do this tier list format for. I've got other fandoms I plan to do for this one as well. But Thomas has a trait I consider quite toxic, and that's he kind of remakes those mistakes. He constantly does the same things over and over again. As I said, that's part of the writer's faults, and so it really depends whether you consider those eras where he does make the same mistakes canon. But then again, you could argue that's the same for all engines, really. So, but I'm just saying that that trait of like redoing the same mistakes over and over again, even though you clearly like have other people give you an earful about like learning those lessons, I think it's really like I said, it's not like it's a trait that it's a trait that like stands out to me, and like as a person, like obviously everyone has different like personal analysis when it comes to certain traits, but I think for Thomas that slightly detracts some points. I don't want to put him in morally grey for obvious reasons. I don't think he's one of those protagonists which like you see in Wicked Binge, the main protagonist is typically near the center, the morally grey center, and that's because they're given the limelight like throughout the entire series, and as a result you end up seeing them do some pretty stupid and sometimes very, very cruel things, especially in terms of when it comes to like comedy series like Family Guy and stuff like that. But with Thomas, since it is kind of a kid's show, he definitely leans in the more like in the better area. So I don't think he's quite morally grey, but I don't think he's quite like a saint either. And obviously he is good. He's very, very good. So I think slightly less good is the best place to put him for the moment. So definitely I'm content with slightly less good. Like I said, this is prone to first time I'm doing this kind of format, so I'll definitely so I'll put him in slightly less good for now. Okay, so next one, Eddie Boy. Steady, he's old. Shout out to the Edward in the Discord server. Yeah, I mean, a very underutilized character, certainly, from a writing standpoint. Like, not a lot of writers can really find material for him. And a reason kind of leans into this. He's almost too perfect, in a way. There's a real sense that you don't see him do too many cruel things, and the only time that you really see him do something bad is, and the fans go absolutely nuts and say it's completely out of character for him to react a certain way. And I like, obviously, kind of, I wouldn't be surprised if like the traits he displays in Edward Strikes Out, yeah, that one episode, again, depends on what you count as canon or not. But yeah, obviously, Edward, I wouldn't be surprised if Edward did display that kind of traits, like if that was part of his character, like personality. Like I'm sure there are people like that. But at the same time, he's mostly known as like the kind one, the old one, and in his earlier like years, he has a very interesting arc compared to the others. We don't really see him young and foolish making the mistakes. And instead, the writer Audrey does something very clever with him. He kind of knows, he depicts him as this old kind of past his prime engine that has seen life and kind of like has his best years behind him. And it's really that adversity that drives his conflict. And so his conflict isn't necessarily him growing as much as it is him being looked down upon, that he's fully grown, that like his life is over pretty much. And that interesting development is definitely makes him a unique one among the series, but it makes him definitely one of the more saintly characters. You know, he's kind, as we mentioned, but he's also really determined. He has like a playfulness, to be honest. Like typically when you have people like of his age, they can be quite cynical, but Edward's not that. He has a very playful persona, and that reflects in a lot of elements, such as like the banter he joins in with the engines, and even like musically, like the themes that played for him are very much, they give off a playful vibe. So Edward's really like he's set a case for himself. He's one of those like engines which makes a really good first impression. Like I would go for a drink with Edward, like I just have such a wholesome, happy conversation with him. So definitely one of the more morally good, more one of the good characters. And like I said, the obviously there's Edward Strikes Out as a period where his character does sort of slack, but everyone's allowed to make mistakes. And to be honest, that's the one instance I can think of where he does like actually falter in terms of actual characterization. Please let me know otherwise if you think different. But yeah, I think he's the first good character here, certainly. Henry is an interesting one. Henry's a very, very, very interesting one. He definitely goes through the most dynamic character change. One of the most, hands down. And it's really realistic how he does Henry. One thing I've always theorized is kind of, because obviously Henry in the earlier books and the earlier seasons was an arse. An absolute arse. So, but the thing is, when you look at the things that he does, or like the things that he says it when he's around Gordon and James, so, which we'll get to in a moment. But I feel like he was one of those, even in like episodes where he's a dick on his own, like Sad Story Henry, chief among those. I feel like his characterization is very much influenced by those around him. And so, and because here's the thing, it's kind of like, I don't know if there's like a syndrome for this or what it's called. If anybody knows, then please leave me a comment. But he strikes me as one of those people that would try to fit in with like the cool kids in school, but because he's trying to hide who he really is. He's trying to hide that kind of persona, that his weakness, which like he perceives as weakness. But as the series goes on, and like the books and things, you see that he turns his weakness into a strength. You see all he's persevered through, and that actually manifests in an actual physical change to him becoming a much stronger and more reliable locomotive. And that change is really one of the more authentic and realistic depictions, like / changes I've seen in the show. And I love it. I love just how I love that change, and just how you see afterwards he becomes so much kinder, so much more he just shows a lot more. He becomes more of a gentle giant character. Even into like to Miller's credit, that was one of the few characters Henry actually got right with like his characterization. Like obviously the special Cole stuff was bullshit, but I think like in terms of characterization, Henry, she kind of nailed Henry on the head, especially with how he grew. And I really, really, he's one of the more like dynamic. So it's interesting, Henry. He's interesting. He's definitely one of the more like inspirational characters for that change. And I think like life itself is about growth, and so you need to be lenient with people um about that kind of growth. And really, Henry is, I'm gonna say it, I think Henry is in good tier. So ironically, the characters forgotten about by Mattel, I'm starting to see a trend. They've been axed from the show, are both in the top tier. So I don't know if anybody else is spotting that trend, but it's certainly getting there. And next up, we have Gordon. Gordon was the first antagonist of the series, and he continues to be. But again, this is seriously one of those characters where you have to take into consideration what canon you follow, especially for like these base characters. It depends. If we're going off Railway Series Gordon, I'd probably put him in good, to be honest. Railway Series Gordon, I would put in good because, again, like with Henry, that sense of growth and like being humbled and understanding, like especially in Gordon's case, like he gets humbled so many times, but that goes to his head. He understands where he went wrong, and he just kept growing. He kept respecting others, and it like drew his arc towards like his retirement. As the Unlucky Tug said, probably the most important character in the Railway series, and like that sense of growth is like it's shown in very subtle ways as the books progress. But I think that sense of characterization is so key to Gordon's character, even when you look at his TV series persona, because he does have like instances of because like he's not oh sorry, that was my bin. He's not unmistakably antagonistic in the actual like he's definitely, if we're going off TV series logic, I'd probably say morally grey, to be honest. Like, very high up on morally grey, because he's clearly one of the Steen team. He stands up for others, and I think that sense of that sense of how do I describe this? And like he's still like as part of the Steam team. Like one of the examples I'm thinking in my head is when he stands up for like Thomas in Hero of the Rails, where he says Thomas is not a toy. Like just little moments like that. Even like by Sharon Miller, where he's clearly like he knows when to kind of step aside, and clearly. And obviously there's instances like Gordon and Spencer, which is one of his strongest classic series episodes for me. Just how that dynamic, how he sees someone who's basically sees a reflection of himself in Spencer, and he is the bigger man as a result, bigger engine, I should say, in this I don't know what Gordon's pronouns are. I don't know what any of these engines' pronouns are, but but it's interesting. It's an interesting case, Gordon. So I'm gonna put him below Thomas for like the antagonistic tendencies, but at the same time, it depends really on how you see Gordon, like what canon you kind of picture him in. And like I said, maybe I need to do this in a different format when push comes to shove, but. At the same time, but I'm going to put him in slightly less good now, so just below Thomas. James is another interesting one, and he doesn't really have much growth. That's a controversial thing to say. He does have instances of usefulness, of course, but certainly as far as Railway Series goes, one of the things I will say, he has this massive growth arc. In what is it? In like James the Red Engine, where he becomes kind of much stronger. And 2 books later, he goes on strike out of pettiness. He, like, again, there's a counter argument to that, and there's 2 like I could present here. He is influenced by Gordon in that kind of phase, because Gordon was definitely the ringleader of that whole strike operation back then. Like, when he was like, Henry's not going. Like, he's the one that kind of proclaims for Henry. And he kind of speaks for those 3. And definitely, like, James doesn't say a single word, like, on his own at least, for those last 2 stories of the book. And I think it's interesting. Like, so, and also another one I want to present is that, like, you see James's determination brought out through stories like Troublesome Trucks and James and the Express. And that determination can sometimes manifest, like I said, not a therapist, but from what I've seen, that determination can sometimes manifest into stubbornness. And definitely in James's sense, it manifests into pride. And that sense of self-fulfillment, that change into something more self-fulfillment, someone more self-fulfilled, after being humbled like James is in the first 2 stories of that book, it's kind of like the anti-Henry, in a way. Like, Henry obviously he gained this kind of persona through his determination, but James, through this determination, became more stubborn and more prideful. And so, he's one of those, I should also emphasize, all of these engines have flaws. There's no way around it. And definitely, James is one of the more interesting cases. TV show-wise, again, he's had a few antagonistic roles. Chief among them, I'd say, is Tale of the Brave, where he was very much an antagonist for that show. That special. And it's interesting because, like, he changes, but again, he has those moments like with Gordon where he has shown, like, growth and, like, standing up for Thomas. Like, he was one of them in Hero of the Rails. But he does show usefulness, but it's kind of it's interesting to me just how morally grey he can be. So honestly, I'd be poised to put him in morally grey. This is kind of like, I will think about, obviously I've got a few more characters to go and I will come back to that, but honestly I think he's very high up morally grey because he does have a lot of antagonist roles, and also just in both Railway series and TV series, and he doesn't really grow. Like I said with Thomas, he doesn't really grow with his story. He becomes, like, more stubborn. He does grow, obviously, but at the same time there's still a sense that he's not that. I'm gonna put him in morally grey for now. Also, hold on, I need to get my charger. There we go, that's better. And, hang on, just check that everything's, yep, all is shipshape and shining. And, again, so next one, Percy. I have my reasons for putting him in good. Because that growth, as we said, his growth has one of the most, he's one of those growths that sticks in the TV series and the Railway series, because he's a major character in both the Railway series and TV series. And you really, his characters in the TV series especially is, like, unidentifiable from how he was in the classic series. And I know what you're saying, that's probably a bad thing, but again, that sense of authentic, natural growth. And I'm going to come back to, like, points I made with Edward for, like, because Unlucky Tug noted this with themes, with music. Like, so season 2, it was kind of like, and season 1, it was very bouncy, jivey, very young, very kind of sprightly, very cheeky. And then season 5, it became much slower. There was kind of more graceful, more kind of sure of himself, but in a more kind of what's the word? Not enclosed. What's the word? Resolute manner. He's certainly a more resolute, like, as time goes on. And I think it's interesting, and like, because here's the thing, my justification, his pranks, like, well, one of the things, he gives it to those who deserve it. Like, he never pranks on someone, as far as I know, he doesn't prank someone who doesn't deserve it. I guess you could talk about, yeah, Percy and the Signal, he gets paid out, like, Gordon and James didn't do anything wrong. Then again, think of, like, Gordon and James are the reasons that Percy came in the first place. Like, think about it. And obviously, and so I can understand how that kind of, how he'd somewhat feel inclined to kind of pay those two out specifically. Granted, it does call into question why he doesn't pay out Henry in that story and why it's just Gordon and James. But then again, those two are like the more morally grey characters, as we established, and it's I feel like his pranks are very kind of innocent, like Thomas and Ghost Train. He calls him silly. He like like Percy is the bearer of karma. I'm a firm believer of karma. Like, I am a firm believer that kind of people get what's coming to them. Oi, bug, shoot. That was a moth. I think that's a moth. It doesn't matter. My throat's getting a bit dry. Hang on. Water! Yeah, my voice is getting a bit dead. I apologize, but... and Percy... Percy, like I said, Percy is the bearer of karma. He gives it to those that absolutely deserve it, and I love him for it. Like, you give him an inch, and he will make you pay, effectively, but not maliciously. And like, it's part of being young. He kind of, like, yeah, part of the argument is that you shouldn't do these pranks in the first place, but at the same time, like, there's still a sense that he's young, and so he's allowed to make those mistakes because of his youth, like, that kind of spirit. And as he grows, he plays less and less, and he kind of gets his head stuck in the work, and that's another point. Huge determination props to him. Tale of the Brave, put upon Percy's promise, like, all these, like, just so much determination. The one outlier, I'd say, is Percy takes the plunge. But like I said with Edward, allowed to make mistakes, and he slightly kind of was in the James direction of letting the pride get to his head, but he kind of had an incident that humbled him and allowed him to grow even further. So major props to Percy. He is our third good character here. And Toby, I think we have another good character here, to be honest. I can't really... Like with Edward, underutilized, but has a very similar, like, character arc to Edward, in that he's kind of overlooked, he's an underdog, and when he comes to Sodor, he just kind of, his growth just sort of stops. And, like, because you'll notice with, like, Toby the Tram Engine, a lot of his arcs don't really revolve around him. Like, I know obviously there's Toby and the Stout Gentleman and Toby and the Stout Gentleman, which kind of revolves around him, but even that's arguably, like, that's like the Fat Controller's holiday. That's the Fat Controller seeing Toby and buying him. Time for Trouble is about Thomas. Dirty Objects is about James. And Mrs. Kindly's Christmas is about, guess who? Mrs. Kindly. So, definitely that his growth, like, he still has growth, so Toby still does have growth, but I think in general he's a fairly underutilized character, more underutilized than Edward, I reckon. Like, granted, like, especially in the like Railway series and like early series, he was kind of seen as like the cohort, one of the trio. He was seen that the branch line trio, I'll call for now, and at the I feel like that trio is now Percy, Thomas, and James. So Toby's kind of taken a back seat for him. So I think Toby's just an unfortunately underdeveloped character, but he's such a G. Like, if that makes sense, he's just so kind, he's so wise, and you can't help but love him. He's like an old, especially like I love especially his characterization in Thomas and the Magic Railroad. He's like that grandfather telling you these amazing stories, like at Christmas or something when he comes over. He has that kind of presence, that aura about him. So definitely a memorable character, but one I wish we saw more of. Duck. So, Duck is definitely an interesting. Also, actually, no. Hang on. One final point on Toby. Tobias and the Half Pariah. Yes, I know we're not kind of mentioning fan projects here, but I love his characterization in that. Obviously, the whole no excuses thing gets a bit tiring after a while, as he really wants to push for that metaphor. But I feel like that sense of imperfection and that angst is so just makes so much sense. If that makes if you know what I mean, like it like that whole angst he feels, coming to Sodor, coming to a new place, and kind of feeling like a freak. Especially feeling like a freak, I feel like that sometimes. I can actually relate to that characterization. So, and it's really, really strong characterization. He's not perfect, but he's definitely like the protagonist. That he's definitely like one of the most well developed characters. Definitely. Probably the best character in Tobias and the Half Pariah. Ironically enough, yeah. When has that ever happened? The protagonist is the best character of a movie. When has that ever happened? Okay, next up we have Duck, and Duck's again another interesting one. Like, I think all these engines so far have had moments of kind of cheekiness and kind of bigotry towards one another or towards others, and so they're definitely one of them. And Duck is definitely one of the more blunt. He's like Duncan. He's plain speaking. Actually, no, I should say that in the Western country accent. Like, I'm a plain engine. I believe in plain speaking, so speak up. So he's definitely one of the more plain, not plain as in blunt characters. And because he takes further action than Percy, I feel like I love his dynamic with him and Duck Takes Charge. He's like that really popular kid that just kind of comes in and sees the bullying that's happening and like goes out to make active change. He takes action. Like I said, he takes charge. He does stuff, and he very much jumps into it. But I think Unlucky Tug noticed that outlined this beautifully in his Railway series, his ranking of all Railway series books. He's not a saint in in Duck and the Diesel Engine. He's not a saint. He is not a saint. Absolutely not. And because he basically plays a joke to this newcomer that has the same influence as others. Granted, they played a very similar trick. Percy was played a very similar trick on by Gordon and James. So there was a very similar trick he pulled there. So it kind of stoops him below to that level. And it's kind of hypocritical. Thinking about it, it's very hypocritical of him to actually put himself in the same situation, to put himself in the same, to do the same things that Gordon and James would. So definitely one of the more morally grey characters, but again, determined, and he kind of, again, and he becomes like, yeah, blah blah blah. And after kind of Diesel plays a trick on him, you kind of see him in a more sympathetic light, and so I think that characterization, and on a TV series basis, we don't see much of him after, I want to say, season 4, and he has his moments where he doesn't listen, but I think generally he's quite a mellow character. Like, he's kind of, again, he's that popular kid. He is that popular kid. He's just there. He knows what he's doing. He looks cool with his design, and just he just doesn't give two shits. Effectively, he does not give two. He could not give two shits. So definitely in a slightly good tier. I'm gonna put him above Gordon. Not quite above Thomas, but like, I know Unlucky Tug actually outlined a rivalry between those two, but I'm going to put him above Gordon in the slightly less good character, but slightly below Thomas, I'd say. Sorry, Duck v Thomas fans. Donald and Douglas. I'm going to rank these two separately because of one key factor, and that is, you can see right here, I have their season 3 pictures, and that's because those two are basically treated like different characters there, but all end up in a very similar result. All end up in a very similar result, and but first let's start with their introduction. They're quite I think what redeems their actions, especially in like the missing coach and like their lies in Hello Twins, is their motivation. The motivation is what justifies their actions. Because they would have died, quite frankly. I'm just gonna put it now. They would have died if they'd stayed in Scotland. Like it literally says that it's like they'll be scrapped if they go back to Scotland. Percy says that in the deputation, I think. And so they do it to survive, and it's very kind of, you can understand, like, we don't know specifically. This is partly why there are so many like fan adaptations of Donald and Douglas's backstory before they came to Sodor. But here's the thing, because we're not shown it visibly, it's left up to the imagination, especially considering how they react to it. To lie like that, you can imagine just what they've been through and how much they don't want to get scrapped. Like, you can really, really feel the emotion through like not knowing their backstory. That whole idea of kind of like something we don't see but it's left up to the imagination, I think, is really, really key in allowing Donald and Douglas to kind of, for their actions to be justified in the earlier kind of seasons. And of course we get to them as characters separately, specifically in seasons 3 and 4. First off, let's start with Donald. Like, obviously he has a kind of he has a more kind of caring side to him, but at the same time, like with how he takes care of Dilly, but also a cheeky kind of vendetta filled kind of very kind of Thomas like, I've noticed. Actually, yeah, kind of a mix of Thomas, Percy, and Toby, slightly. Like, there's a real kind of caring nature about like Donald, and he has the like he pays Duck back. Granted, Duck doesn't really deserve it. But again, he kind of meant it harmlessly, and Duck kind of escalated it by playing the prank on him. So he kind of he felt inclined to kind of pay him back. So and the thing is, I love that episode because everyone's just like, all the pranks like otherwise in like the series are just so vicious and so like embarrassing. They're a humbling moment, but Duck and Donald, they just laugh it off. And I love that. I love that shift in characterization because it's at a period in the series where characters have had time to grow and develop. And so they kind of understand that, like, engines tease each other. That kind of understanding of kind of that understanding and that growth is really apparent in that episode. And it's one of the more underrated episodes, I think. It's just so I think definitely Donald goes into slightly less. Is it slightly less good? Actually, no. I put him in good. Actually, no. I'm gonna put him in slightly good. I'm gonna go into the reasons why. Douglas, I'm gonna put one step above him. Because it takes a special person to do what he did. And like I said, being left up to the imagination, that past trauma that they must have felt, which is left up to the imagination. Well, otherwise, why would they lie like that? But to push through that, it's one thing kind of forgetting about post-trauma and kind of moving on from it. That's like one way. But Douglas faced his fear. He faced it. By rescuing Oliver, he kind of acknowledged the chance he was given. And so to give that back is so powerful. It's such a powerful kind of moment. And like, obviously I can't, it's kind of criminal to put one over the other, but I just have so much more respect for Douglas to kind of get over that implied past trauma and push through. I have so much respect for him, and I love, like, he's one of my favorite characters hands down, and so putting him in that position. But these two, mostly you could put him above. You can interchange them basically depending on kind of what you throw on most. They do have it's a bit sad that in later seasons they kind of become like especially in Twin Trouble, I don't really like that episode, to be honest. I don't really like that episode. But so they do sort of become one entity again. If we're talking about fan projects, oh god, Caledonian Twins, anyone? These two, Jesus Christ, like, they actually murder, they justify, like, punishments for murder. But then again, like, that Diesel they murdered did murder another. It was effectively, what they did was effectively the equivalent of capital punishment. Was effectively the equivalent, what they did there. But I mean, it's kind of blunt, and it's one of the more things they've done. But I'm not really going to count fan series in this. This is kind of a hypothetical scenario if you counted fan series. And obviously, both of them are quite stubborn, but again, that falls into their past trauma. Like, they were the last to accept Boko, for example. But then again, that's down to past trauma. That's kind of, they can't really help that. Next character, Oliver. Definitely a fascinating one. And one that, like, he goes through, like, the characterization, especially, like, Railway series. Like, I've heard so many people, like, put him over Duck, but I feel like most of the reason that is because of how fascinating his backstory is, and that sense of, I feel like that's slightly, overseas from, Oliver's actual character, and you understand that kind of his, you understand, like, Oliver's trauma. Like, not trauma, sorry, his, gonna be honest, his character shift in, Oliver Owns Up / Resource and Sagacity is one of the most sudden character shifts I've ever seen. Like, Oliver's just been through a really traumatic experience. You'd think he'd make the most of the life he's given. Nope, he absolutely, like, just, he lets it all go to his head. And it's just, and one, it's something we've seen before, like, and it's irritating, but at the same time, why, it's just, why are we seeing this storyline again? He's just been through a traumatic experience. Make the most of your life, man. Again, don't know these characters' pronouns, but still. But just, Why? Why? But then again, he does have his redeeming arc in Toad Stands By, where he literally rips a truck apart. Before any of you like scream, "Oh my god, he's a murderer!" He didn't mean to. He didn't mean to. It was involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary truck slaughter. So if he's getting like paid for his crimes, involuntary truck slaughter. And to be honest, no one really cares about the trucks in the universe. No one really cares. Oh god, that's okay. I've just got inspiration for a new horror fic now. No happy endings, got nothing on this one. But the traumatic treatment of trucks. But yeah, Oliver definitely is slightly on and off character for me, anyways. And also afterwards, his character just drops off a little bit. So he's not like a bad character in terms of like morally gray. I don't find him particularly interesting as I think other people do. But I'd say in terms of growth, just below Thomas. I think they have very similar characterizations, and I'd put both of them kind of in the side. And the thing is, even after Toad Stands By, like Toad's Adventure, like granted I don't know when that was specifically canoned, but Jesus Christ, he's off at it again. He's off on the boasting again. Make the most of your life, man. Like just make the most of it. And he's an inspiration, granted, but a flawed inspiration. So that's how I describe Oliver. I just put Emily in here for the fuck of it. And quite frankly, she's a difficult one to rank. Because obviously, it's a tale of two Emilys. Like, Season 7 Emily, kind, really kind of a sort of mother figure, definitely for the engines. Or, like, big sister, whatever you want to call it. She definitely has that vibe. But I've heard so much criticism of her bossiness in later seasons. But at the same time, though, like, when is her bossiness particularly... she's just more annoying. It's not particularly evil, her bossiness. And besides, like, she mellows out as the CGI series comes into play. But when is her bossiness any more, like, morally grey than the others? And knowing that kind of sense of kindness, I'd say, like, around the same as Thomas. Like, around the same as Thomas. That bossiness definitely deducts points for her. So yeah. I think between Thomas and Oliver is a good place to put her. Diesel. Now, here's where we get to the good stuff. Everyone loves talking about villains, and everyone loves talking about, like, arcs, because he, interestingly, as the CGI series comes out, he mellows out. And also, another example, an obscure one, Thomas and the Evil Diesel. Like, it has evil in his name, but he actually saves Thomas, bizarrely enough, so he does have somewhat of a redemption arc. And, I think one of the more interesting I know I'm not really talking about fan interpretations, but I am definitely taking them into account. The Peel Godred branch is, I think, branch line, I think it is? Yeah, his interpretation, his little two-parter that takes place after Thomas and the Evil Diesel, I think is a really good interpretation of him. How he's trying to kind of mellow out, but it's kind of who he is, which, I'm gonna be honest, as I've grown, I think it's an interesting character to kind of have a sense of like how much of us is defined, but I don't think it's an excuse, personally. So kind of, it's like, oh, it's just who I am, I can't change. And I think Diesel runs with that. He kind of runs with that evil persona. He can't really change who he is, which is slightly toxic. So I think that's one of the things. And then there's obviously the obvious, such as framing Duck, which is like, again, Duck's no saint in that episode or story, and like obviously did like similar things. But Diesel, oh my god, like like it's, I think people, and especially like the story, they kind of want you to be blinded by the severity of Diesel's crimes. it's like, it's interesting, because, like, he does have a somewhat redemption arc, like, especially in, like, Springtime with Diesel is, like, a good example, like, in a CGI series standpoint, and bloody hell, like, this, bloody hell, the just, he's a frustrating character. He keeps making the same mistakes over and over and over again. I just don't think it's but he does definitely feel get remorse, but like, he's a frustrating one. He's a very frustrating character, and that's part of what makes him such a good character. But definitely our first slightly less evil character of this thing. But however, where he comes in relation is very much down to this one, Diesel 10. He basically wants to commit manslaughter or vehicle slaughter. His crimes are, like, heavy on the list, but they're all really, the saturation of which are really all in one film, and that's Thomas and the Magic Railroad, obviously. And he's a pantomime classic mustache-twirling evil villain. He's the perfect, on paper, the perfect villain. Like, in how he's characterized, especially how he's performed. Like, if you look at all those kind of traits, especially in, like, the performance and all of that, he is a perfect how you do a villain, right? Hands down. But we're not talking about that. Morally, he's definitely interesting. I put him in evil, but bloody hell. Like, it just becomes an antagonist for the sake of, oh, it's Diesel 10, of course, he's going to be a protagonist. And then, of course, it's going to lead to more fan stories to give him a sympathetic backstory, or, I don't know, just make him a good guy suddenly, out of nowhere, out of the blue, I think. Thomas Creator Collective, anyone? But, again, it's difficult to rank, and, he's definitely below Diesel, I reckon. I definitely think he's below Diesel, but how below Diesel is really up to you. And I don't think anything's keeping him from evil. I think, but at the same time, he's just evil for evil's sake, and it makes his characterization later on the line really pathetic and really uninteresting. So, so I'm gonna put him in evil. Next one. Cue the meme.
You're an irredeemable monster!
Oh, what took you so long, idiot?
Thank you. And honestly, Sailor John, I mean, he's the evilest character here. Granted, we've only seen one perspective of him. We've seen him only in Sodal's Legend of the Lost Treasure, but the reason I put him here was not only so I could use that meme, but also because, just, he is the evilest character, I'd argue, because he's also so realistic. You think of, like Diesel 10, granted, you don't really know who's controlling him or who's driving him, but Sailor John is kind of like, he can go anywhere, he can do anything, he's more threatening in that way. A human villain is kind of like, that sense of, like, he tries to kill Thomas with dynamite, so he definitely has the manslaughter charges, and of course, like, grand theft robbery, and of course, threats or like blackmail towards Skiff. So he's definitely an evil character. And granted, and like one that you'd actually see, like the manipulation he plays into Thomas is like so clever. It's not like Disney villain, it's not like Disney villain, like modern twist villain like status, because you know he's evil from the start. It's not like he literally was like, oh, I'm this really friendly new guy. Oh, sorry, I decided to be evil. I've changed my mind. Like, it's not that at all. It's actually much more kind of, it's believable that he is the villain from the start, and I think that's what makes him such a great character. Rest in peace, John Hurt, honestly. That was his final role, actually, believe it or not. And, definitely one of, probably the most evil character Thomas has seen. I'd argue, for me. Anyways. and again, realistic, like, manipulators are everywhere, and I think it's a really good, how they characterized him is a really good way of kind of introducing that sense of evil. So let's have a look at this. So obviously, Sailor John and Diesel 10, I think, are set in stone. I'm not going to change any of that. Diesel, a frustrating character, but definitely on the more morally grey side. James, I'm going to get some controversy from this, but James, honestly, just doesn't have as many redeeming qualities as the others, clearly. Gordon, heavy antagonist vibes, especially in the TV series, which drags him down, but he's definitely, on the more, if we were going Railway Series logic, he'd be much higher up, in that sense of growth. So he has grown, but, like, not enough. Duck and Oliver, really, you could interchange these two, but at the same, I'm gonna put Oliver above Duck because, like, we've seen more of Duck, and so we've seen he has more of a kind of a blunts. It's not narcissism, but it's definitely that kind of blunt side can definitely lead to issues down the road. That sounds so offensive. Just calling it issues. Just Duck needs to go to therapy, guys. And then Oliver, obviously, imperfect. And I'm trying to not let my prejudices on characterization get in the way, but still. Emily, a tale of two Emilys, really. So, next one. Thomas, the cheeky little bastard himself. Again, I think that's a good spot for him. I think he's definitely, like, he's one of those protagonists that's, like, flawed, but he's definitely higher up on the spectrum. Donald and Douglas, I think, are both very, very admirable characters on their own, but it's such a shame that they kind of become one entity as the show goes on, because they're just as strong, I'd argue, just as strong apart as they are. Well, actually, no, they are strong apart because they are so, because you see them together so often. Toby, I'm happy with him being there, and very underutilized character, but one with a lot of gleaming traits, like a very, very kind of just a pleasant fellow. He's a very pleasant fellow. Percy, I'm going to put Percy further up, actually. I think, ooh, is he above Edward? I don't think he's quite above Edward, but I'm going to put him second. Henry, I think, has a great arc, inspiration to everyone, and I think, actually, no, I'm going to put him just below Toby because of the, like, teasing, and because he had to go through that growth, and because he found himself in the wrong crowd. That's fan theory. That's not actually canon, but that's my theory. Obviously Toby, Percy just, he's got a lot. He's got a surprising saint, I think. Definitely one of the biggest surprises here. And then, of course, Edward, who is the king of good and definitely the one most destined for heaven. Let's end this before I get shot. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, new, very new format, and I apologize if I have been inconsistent. New style of video, but hopefully a good one. Hopefully hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. I've certainly enjoyed bringing out this more analytical side of me, and hopefully I can do this more in the future. Like, leave down below any requests of any tier lists you want to see in the future, any ideas you have that you want me to, like, reenact, or create a tier list. Also, by the way, I will leave a link down below so you can do your own tier list of this and send me a screenshot of kind of what you think. And so definitely a fun one. I think it's a unique idea that I think's I just had a lot of fun making this one. So thank you guys so much for watching. This is Little Dal speaking. Drop the video a like if you enjoy, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next video. See ya.